Assalamualaikum and welcome to the Harborne Islamic Study Circle, HISC Seerah session 147. This is the 9th and possibly penultimate session we're going to do on the Treaty of Hudaibiyah. So in the last session, we talked about how the Prophet ﷺ, he told the Sahabi at the end of the treaty negotiations to stand up, shave their heads, and to return to Medina, but nobody listened. So he went back to his tent, complained to his wife Salama that the people aren't listening. And then she said, okay, fine. Why don't you just go out and set the example, shave your hair, and sacrifice your camel, and then you'll see these guys following suit, which is what they did. And again, this was, we mentioned this was a new ruling. Hitherto, from the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam, you would only sacrifice your animals and shave your head once you'd completed the rites of pilgrimage, once you'd done the tawaf, etc. But here, they've been prevented from doing it outside their control. So the ruling is that if you, faced with those circumstances, if you do it there and then, it counts as if you've done your Umrah or your Hajj. You complete the rites and then you return back. And again, that's critically sort of important, especially in our times today when, due to coronavirus and other things, people are prevented from doing Umrah, or people may be even prevented from doing Hajj later on this year because of the virus. But if you've made your earnest intention to do the things and started your journey, etc., you are allowed to, when faced with these difficulties outside your control, just complete the rites, and you inshallah get the reward. So that's what they did. So the Sahabi all followed suit, and we talked about how the Prophet ﷺ, the first camel that he sent to Mecca was the camel of the previously captured Abu Jahl. So his personal camel was the one that the Prophet ﷺ had slaughtered first and sent that meat to be eaten and distributed to the people of Mecca. And as they're riding back, the Umar ibn al-Khattab, he's really upset at how he had upset the Prophet ﷺ and challenged the Prophet ﷺ. So he tries to strike up conversation with the Prophet ﷺ, but the Prophet ﷺ snubs him 3 times, didn't return his salam. So Umar is feeling really depressed. And then Surat Al-Fath is revealed, and the Prophet ﷺ calls for Umar, and Umar then receives news of the great victory, and he's sort of rushing up and down the lines of the pilgrims, shouting out, clear victory, clear victory. And again, we went through the whole of Surat Al-Fath last session, and talked about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises the Ansar, praises the Muhajir, praises those that gave the pledge under the tree, and criticized the hypocrites. So that's what we did last time. So this session, again, it's although they're going to return to Medina, it's still linked to Hudaybiyah because it's the clauses of the treaty which are important. But one thing that's mentioned in some of the books that happens is as they're marching back, the Prophet ﷺ, he would sort of march as much as he can in the evening time, in the night time, because the Prophet had said that the land shortens at night. Essentially, it's a perception that when you're traveling at night, and you sort of may be familiar when you're sort of going on long journeys with your parents or somewhere else, that when you're traveling at night, the perception is you get there quicker. But in their time, obviously they're marching, they can possibly cover more distance at night time. So this happened on one of the evenings, and the Sahabi all stopped off and settled down, and it was really late, and they were all very tired. And the Prophet said, "Who's going to protect us? Who's going to, guard over us, and who's going to wake us up for Fajr?" And then Bilal, he volunteers to be the guard, to be the protector, and essentially the one who wakes them up. And again, they didn't have mobile phones, or they didn't have alarm clocks. They needed to be up to see when is time to wake everyone up. But everyone else is tired, and they all fall asleep, and basically they miss Fajr because Bilal also falls asleep. And then it said in some of the books that the first to wake up was the Prophet ﷺ, and others say it was Abu Bakr and Umer, but they were afraid to, jolt the Prophet ﷺ. So they were sort of standing near the Prophet ﷺ. None of them would have the sort of audacity to sort of say, "Wake up, oh, wake up," right? But they woke up when the heat of the sun was on their face, and it's not just one or two people; it's the entire troop of Muslims, right? 1,400 of them. All of them are so tired that they fall asleep, and none of them wake up for Fajr at dawn time, despite the fact that this is their routine. They're all programmed to wake up at Fajr time, because that's the routine. You go to sleep early, you wake up at Fajr time, and then you pray, and then you go to the fields, do all your normal things, and then you come back for a siesta. So Abu Bakr and Umar, they're sort of saying Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, and the Prophet woke up, and then called over Bilal. And then Bilal, he's the last one to wake up, because he was the last one to obviously sleep. He tried as much as he could to stay awake, and then sort of the Prophet asked him, and then he goes, "Ya Rasulullah, I tried, but the one who took my soul also took the one who took your soul also took my soul." So basically saying, look, I stayed awake as long as I could, but this is the qadr of Allah. And so the Prophet said, "Okay, let's get away from this place." So they immediately packed up and left, and they found another spot, and then they prayed their Fajr there. And again, we've mentioned another similar story on the way back from one of the battles. So some scholars say they missed Fajr on two occasions, but coming back from Hudaibiyah and coming back from one of the battles, and I think it was Murasay, and also they missed. We talked before about the Battle of the Ditch, Battle of Khandaq. They missed Asr because of the arrows being fired at them. That wasn't sort of out of laziness. That was genuinely sort of fearful of their lives. And again, the other thing to bear in mind is that the Prophet ﷺ, these are the only recorded times that we have that he's missed his prayer in his 23 years as a prophet. And again, it's not out of laziness. He always made sure that he prayed. Here on this occasion, they've been marching, and they were all very tired. And again, the other thing just to bear in mind is that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had willed it, he would have ensured that the Prophet would have woken up for Fajr. He could have sent Jibreel Islam down to wake him up, or any other thing happened, or one of the other Sahabi could have woken up, or he could have made sure Bilal stayed up so he wouldn't miss his Fajr. But again, it's the lesson there is that the best of us can oversleep and miss our Fajr, but we shouldn't make it a habit. It's a one-off essentially. And if you miss your Fajr, and again, Allah is showing us how to do it, is that we ask for forgiveness and you make it up right away. So as soon as you can, and certainly before the next prayer, you should make up the Fajr. So if you've overslept and you've woken up and you've missed your prayer, then you pray then. Don't leave it to the next week or leave it till much later on. You should try and make it up as straight away as you can. So then the Sahabi, they're back in Medina now, and the implications of the treaty coming into full force. And we talked before about how the lines of the hypocrites, Allah mentioned in the Qur'an how the hypocrites would make their excuses, and that's what happened. So we won't go into that in any detail, but essentially the hypocrites came, they didn't know that the verses had already been revealed in Surah Al-Fath, and they're already giving excuses of why they didn't accompany the Prophet ﷺ for Hudaybiyah, or the pilgrimage, because they set out for pilgrimage. The whole episode, the whole Hudaybiyah episode, it lasted a month and a half. So they left they left Medina. It takes about 10 days to get to Mecca, but they had to have a detour. They camped outside of Hudaybiyah. So they camped at Hudaybiyah outside of Mecca, stayed there for maybe about 3 weeks, whilst the negotiations are happening, and then sort of coming back. So it's said that the entire sort of beginning to end, it lasted maybe 6 or so weeks. And when they got back, one of the first tests of the treaty was someone called Abu Basir. So Abu Basir, he was someone who lived in Mecca, and he's known as the first sort of muhajir after Hudaybiyah. So he escapes Mecca, and everyone knows the treaty conditions. But Abu Basir, he knew what happened to Abu Jandal, Suhail's son. But he's thinking to himself, surely that was a one-off. This was Suhail's own son, and he's going to chance it himself. So he escapes Mecca, gets to Medina. So he's the first muhajir after Hudaybiyah. And then the Quraish find out that he's gone. So then they want to see how much the Prophet ﷺ keeps to the treaty. So they, after 2 or 3 days, the Khuzā tribe, they send some emissaries to the Prophet to say, basically, hand us back Abu Basir in accordance with the treaty. So the Prophet ﷺ, he calls Abu Basir and says to them, these 2 men have come to take you. You came here knowing the treaty we had signed, and I'm not going to be treacherous according to the treaty, so return to your people. So the interesting things there are that when Abu Basir came, the Prophet ﷺ didn't immediately say to him, you have to go back. So the Prophet ﷺ didn't turn him away. He was aware that he had come, but he was keeping strictly to the letter of the treaty, the letter of the law. Not necessarily the spirit of the law, but certainly to the letter of the law, what he had signed. It wasn't the Prophet ﷺ's job to enforce the treaty. So the treaty was, if somebody leaves Mecca, comes to Medina, he needs to return to Mecca. The treaty doesn't say the Prophet ﷺ has to return him. It just says that person needs to be returned. So if you're sort of, for the legally minded people, it's basically just sticking to the letter of the law. he must be returned. But it doesn't say the Prophet has to make sure he is returned to Mecca. So according to the treaty, the Quraish, or the interpretation of the treaty, the Quraish need to send people to Medina and bring them back. Okay? So that's essentially what happened. It doesn't say the Prophet must turn away people. So Abu Basir came, and it's up to the Quraish to bring him back. So the enforcement of the treaty, of the contract, it's not up to the Prophet, it's for the Quraish. Those things, those details weren't written into the contract. So there wasn't, in the hubris that Suhail had, he didn't go into those details. So these two people they come, and Abu Basir is called and said, you need to go back. So then Abu Basir says exactly the same thing that Abu Jandal says. Look, you're going to return me after Allah has saved me, because he's been persecuted in Mecca, he's become free, and he's escaped. He's in Medina, and he said, look, are you gonna return me after Allah has provided a way out and saved me? And then the Prophet says the exact same thing that he told to Abu Jandal. He says that to Abu Basir, and he says, Allah will make a way out for you. So then Abu Basir he's from Bani Thaqif, from Taif, he has to go back. And his sort of family, they'd settled in Taif. They were from Taif, rather, and they'd settled in Mecca. They were allied to Bani Zuhra. When he'd become a Muslim, Abu Basir, they'd imprisoned him, and then he managed to escape from Mecca and come on foot to Medina. It's not as if he'd found a camel or a horse, and then this was somebody who'd and probably around about the time when the people were still in and around Hudaybiyah, because obviously it's going to take you longer on foot to travel from Mecca to Medina than it is if you're on camel. So the Prophet said to him, look, be of good cheer, surely Allah will find you a way out. So Abu Basir, he's handed back to these two people, and he has to go back. The Prophet commanded him to go back with these two people who had come to collect him. So then the story goes that they're on their way back. They're walking back. They've just literally left Medina, and they're walking back. So Abu Basir, he starts chatting to these two people who are taking him back. So he tries to become friendly with them and sort of banter, despite being a prisoner. So Abu Basir looks at one of them and says, oh my gosh, I've never seen such a beautiful sword before. And so the chap says, oh yeah. He starts bragging about his sword. And he goes, yeah, I've killed so-and-so and so-and-so for these people. And I went into this battle and that battle. And Abu Basir says, wow, must be a really lovely sword. And it looks really well made. And so he's just really picking up the man's ego. And the man's thinking, yeah. And then Abu Basir goes, wow, would you allow me to touch it? Can I see it? And so the man says, yeah, obviously. And he sort of, shows him his sword. Abu Basir grabs the sword, chops the man's head off. And of course, the other man freaks out. The other man's name is Kauthar. He freaks out, and he is, running hell for leather, straight back to Medina, right? And Abu Basir is running after him. And it said, Kauthar, he's sort of, so freaked out. He's sort of lifting up his thobe that you can see his private parts as he's running for dust, So he's just seen his companion's head being chopped off, right? And so straight back to Medina, straight into the Prophet's masjid, and everyone is sort of aghast. This guy is pale as anything. Panting and really sweat dripping everywhere. And the Prophet he throws himself Kauthar at the feet of the Prophet. So the Prophet says, this man has seen a terrible thing. And this chap's yelling, my companion is being killed and I am the next one, so protect me. My companion is being killed. So shortly after that, obviously Abu Basir he comes up with the sword, the really nice sword in his hand, and he turns to the Prophet and says, "O Prophet of Allah, you have fulfilled your obligation. You returned me to them, but God has delivered me." Right? So he's turning it around. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he knew exactly what this meant. And he turns away from Abu Basir. So he turns his back to Abu Basir and he goes, "Oh, alas for his mother. Woe to his mother." Right? What a fine firebrand for war, if only he had other men with him. Right? So he's sending the clear message to Abu Basir that basically, I can't be a party to this. Right? I can't keep you here. Right? But you need to know that if they send someone else, I have to return you according to the conditions of the treaty. So then Abu Basir, he's trying to negotiate and says, "Look, I've got the armor and the booty of the dead man, and this should be treated as booty and divided in fifths according to the laws of distribution of ghanima, of war booty." And the Prophet says, "No, if I did that, they would hold me accountable for that, and then they would say that I did not fulfill the terms of the treaty that I swore to." So again, the Prophet is trying to be really careful and to say, look, if I accept this war booty, then I could be accused of going back on the treaty. So therefore, I can have nothing to do with it, right? So the Prophet turns to Abu Basir, says the war booty, the spoils, are for you, and that's your concern. And then he said, "And take you back this man to those who had sent him." Right, so it's basically saying, Kauthar, the other man who was spared, he needs to go back to or he's basically saying to Kauthar, you need to, take him back. And Kauthar, the Quraishi, he turned pale and he goes, "Oh, Muhammad, I value my life. My strength is not enough for him, and I don't have the hands of two men." And basically saying, look, there were two of us who came. He's killed one of them. I don't have the physical ability to restrain him and take him back to Mecca. This is almost a death sentence for me. So the Quraishi has refused to take into custody the prisoner. Right? So the Prophet turned to him and said, "Well, in that case, go and do what you will." Right? So basically he's saying, look, so Abu Basir then has a think about it and he goes, "Ya Rasulullah, you have fulfilled your responsibilities, but Allah has allowed me to escape." Right? And so then he basically, he has time, he prepares his provisions, and he takes his booty essentially, because the Prophet refused to take it, and he flees far from Medina, and he goes to a neutral place, because he can't go to any territory that is controlled by the Muslims or have a treaty with the Muslims, because that also breaks the terms of the Treaty of Hudaibiyah. He can't go to the Quraishi controlled or allied areas, because again, they're going to hand him over. So he needs to find a neutral territory where he can basically set up camp. So he goes to a place called Saif Al-Bahr, which is sort of near the coastal area, but importantly, it's part of the trading routes between Mecca and Syria. Okay, this is important for later on. So Abu Basir, he sets up camp in Saif Al-Bahr, and then what happens is that Umar bin al-Khattab, he starts a letter writing campaign. So all the secret Muslims that are in persecution, Umar starts to write secret letters to all of them, and he quotes the Prophet ﷺ, right? And this is like a sort of a nod, wink type of thing. He quotes the Prophet ﷺ, "Oh, woe to his mother! If only he had other men with him, he would start a war." So the secret Muslims that get this letter, they understand what this means, and in the letter are directions to where Abu Basir is. He's camped out in such and such a place, right? So what then happens is these secret Muslims, they escape persecution and they flee to where Abu Basir is. And within a short space of time, Abu Basir, who's there just by himself, he becomes 2 or 3, they become 10, they become 15, 50, 60, 80 people, right? All these secret Muslims or Muslims under persecution, they know they can't go to Medina because they're going to be handed back, as according to the Treaty of Hudaibiyah, what happened to Abu Jandal. And obviously Abu Basir's tale has become folklore. Everyone knows what he did. You know, he killed one of his guards and he ran off. But the Prophet ﷺ refused to take him. So they know they can't do that. So he's become sort of a living legend almost. So he's a magnet for all these other Muslims who then sort of coalesce to where he's staying. And again, you know, Umar, he's agitating all these other Muslims. Okay, fine, you know, you're under persecution, but no, Abu Basir is here, and this is what the Prophet ﷺ said, right? And so what they start to do now is they basically, they wreak revenge on the Quraish. So the Quraish, they've signed the peace treaty with the Prophet ﷺ, 10 years peace. There's no fighting between them or between their allies. And Abu Basir and his band of merry men, they understand this. But Abu Basir, he's in neutral territory. He's not under the jurisdiction of the Prophet ﷺ. He's not under the jurisdiction of the Quraish. He is essentially the first guerrilla army, right? So he is out of anyone's formal jurisdiction. So he launches a guerrilla army. He's got all these other people, and they start raiding the caravans of the Quraish. So the Quraish, they thought that now that they've got peace, they can send their trade to Syria and to other places. But according to the treaty, they can't do anything about Abu Basir because he's independent, right? And anything that he gets from raiding the caravans, he keeps. It's not war booty either. So, you know, so you can see how through the treaty that Suhail had engineered and felt that really sort of, puffed up and really proud of, how each clause of the treaty now is coming back to bite them. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, look, these guys have nothing to do with me. They're out of my jurisdiction. He doesn't negotiate with them. He just says, leave them be. And all the Muslims are congregating. And then those Muslims, they're now raiding these caravans. And they're amassing huge amounts of wealth. And this is causing so much of a problem for the pagans of Mecca that they cannot control these exiled colonists, right? So within a few months or a year or so, they actually send a delegation begging the Prophet ﷺ to renege on that clause of the treaty. So basically, they say that, do away with the treaty, complete that part of the treaty. So they're the ones who insisted that if anyone comes from Mecca to Medina, they need to be sent back, right? And amongst these, you've now got people like Walid, the brother of Khalid. You've got some really prominent people who are plying their guerrilla army skills and having this really strategic encampment, and they recognize Abu Basir as their leader, and Abu Jandal, he was one of the very first ones, Sahail's son, to join Abu Basir. So now you've got the Quraish literally begging the Prophet ﷺ to cancel these conditions in the treaty, right? And so the Prophet, and they basically say, look, they invoke their kinship, their tribal allegiances. So the Prophet ﷺ finally agrees that, and again, it's in the Prophet ﷺ's interest to have these Muslims come back to Medina. So the Quraysh sent the letter to the Prophet ﷺ to ask them to take this guerrilla army back into the community, and they promised that they won't ask for them to be returned to Mecca. So the Prophet ﷺ then he wrote a letter to Abu Basir, says you can now come to Medina with all your companions. In the meantime, and this is the qadr of Allah, Abu Basir, he falls seriously ill, and he receives the letter of the Prophet ﷺ essentially whilst he's on his deathbed, right? So he receives the letter, he reads it. Basically, he's been forgiven. Well, not forgiven, because he's been allowed back to Medina. He reads it and dies clasping the letter in his hands. So then the other Muslims, they pray janazah over him and they bury him, and they made a little mosque in that area close to where they buried him. And the rest of the people, they returned back to Medina, and obviously welcomed as heroes. And again, it just shows how these clauses within the treaty, they came back to strengthen the Muslims, and the law of unintended consequences, how it really affected the Quraish and the other pagans. And again, there's a lot of booty, there's a lot of wealth that these people they had, and again, they lived off that for months, and some say up to over a year. And one of the stories is when Abu Basir first got to the coastline, Saif Al-Bahr, he ran out of dates and he didn't know what to do. And then Allah, he would command the fish to jump out of the sea to land by him, right? So that's essentially how he survived in the early days. Is basically, he ran out of dates, and then the fish would jump out of the sea, and then he would, he would survive on the fish. Another couple of stories related to that is Suhail ibn Amr, who we talked about, who did the negotiation. He insisted on the blood money from the Prophet ﷺ for the person that Abu Basir had killed, because they sent two people, one of them was killed. So Suhail sort of saying, look, and this was a relative of Suhail, so I want blood money from this, and the Prophet ﷺ has to pay. So he went to Abu Sufyan, who was obviously the de facto chief, and then Abu Sufyan said, look, don't be silly. Why should the Prophet ﷺ pay? He kept the agreement, right? So the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Sufyan said, look, he was honorable. He returned Abu Basir when we asked him to. So Suhail said, okay, so he knows he's not going to get the blood money from the Prophet ﷺ. So, and then he goes, well, then the Quraish should pay. And then the Quraish said, look, it's nothing to do with us. It was Abu Basir who killed him. So then he went to Bani Zurah and said, you guys should pay because he's one of you. And then they goes, well, no, it's nothing to do with us. He left us, so we're not going to pay. So then Suhail was left without any blood money. So it went unpaid. So that's the story of Abu Basir. The last couple of minutes just to finish off on another related matter to the Treaty of Hudaibiyah. So we've got the situation of what happens when the menfolk are escape from Mecca and they go to Medina. They need to be returned as according to the articles of the treaty. Then shortly after Abu Basir, another immigrant, Muhajir, came, but this was Khulthum bint Uqba ibn Mu'ayth, right? And Uqba ibn Mu'ayth, that was the one who threw the intestines of the camel on the Prophet ﷺ when he was in Sajda. So he had a daughter, Khulthum. She became Muslim, right? So Khulthum, she escapes Mecca and she flees persecution and finds a way into Medina. So now what do we do? This is a very tricky situation. It's one thing returning, big strapping, men and sort of strong fighters like Abu Basir, right? But it's another thing to return females who are under persecution back to Mecca for persecution. So she finds herself, or she escaped to Medina, and what to do with that. Even the Prophet ﷺ didn't know what to do with that. So, again, the letter of the law is, you could interpret that the actual wording of the letter was that no man who leaves Mecca, except that they need to be returned. So when Suhail is insisting on that being written down, he writes, no man who leaves. So here you've got a female who leaves. So again, if you look at, strictly speaking, the letter of the law, the Prophet ﷺ is well within his rights to keep Khulthum in Medina, because he's not breaking the letter of the law, which is no man. But it's understood when somebody is writing those things down that when you say, especially in those times, no man, you mean no person, right? So the treaty didn't say no man or woman; it just said no man, right? But it's understood that means nobody who leaves. But again, that's not what was written. So the Prophet ﷺ, he is sticking to the letter of the law by not returning a female, because the actual contract, the treaty, says no man who leaves. But then Allah revealed some verses that clarified this. And again, in chapter 60, verses 10 to 12, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in translation, O you who believe, when a believing woman has come to you as an emigrant, examine them. Allah knows best as to their faith. Then if you know them to be true believers, do not send them back to the disbelievers. They are not lawful wives for the disbelievers, nor are the disbelievers lawful husbands for them. but give the disbelievers that amount of money, the mahr, that they have spent on them. And there will be no sin on you to marry them if you have paid their mahr to them. Likewise, hold not the disbelieving women as wives. And the reason, later on, O Prophet, when the believing women come to you, when the believing women come to you to give you the pledge, the bay'ah, that they will not associate anything in worship with Allah. So again, the Allah's making it clear that if a believing Muslim woman who comes from Medina, so Mecca to Medina, just make sure that they're Muslim to begin with. And then if they are, then you keep them. You're not supposed to send them back. The money that was given to them as a dowry, as a mahr, needs to be returned, and then basically their marriage or their links to their other family are broken, and then you treat them as your own. And it said that people like Muawiyah married the first woman, and Safwan ibn Umayyah married the second one, so that now that these people have left Mecca, they're completely by themselves in Medina. They're muhajir. They've left everything, so they need to have social support in Medina. So that's why people they would take them as their wives. So they've got that social network. And other reports say that Khulthum, she was married to Zayd bin Haritha once the mahr was returned. So that's the other aspect of Sulh al-Hudaybiyah, the treaty. Essentially, you can see how the treaty was interpreted and how the Prophet ﷺ worked around the treaty. He kept strictly to the terms of the treaty, to the word. He was never treacherous and didn't break the agreement, and there was no way anyone could accuse him of doing things which broke the agreement, because he was always fastidious to make sure that the terms of the written agreement were kept, right? And it's not it's not the character of a Muslim, especially not of the Prophet ﷺ, to make an agreement and then to go against that agreement. It's not like these board games where you suddenly sort of make an agreement and then you go back on that without any more. No, if you make an agreement, you need to stick to the agreement, and you tie into the agreement. If we do break it, these are how we break it. You give you give a year's notice, or you give 3 months notice, and you negotiate these things. So you need to stick to the treaty as it is. And again, we'll see how the Prophet ﷺ again uses the terms of the treaty later on, when the treaty is deemed to have been broken by the Quraish, and then that basically leads to Fatih Makkah, where the Prophet ﷺ, he then cancels the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which allows him, because of a violation from the Quraishi side, which allows him then to march on Makkah and open Makkah. And again, this is within a couple of years. So you've got 1,400 people who went for pilgrimage within a couple of years, and this shows the genius of the treaty, and why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the Prophet this was wahi. He had to sign the treaty. He couldn't see the benefits of it, but within a couple of years, 1,400 people for pilgrimage. Within a couple of years, 10,000 went to Fatih Makkah, right? So if you look at the whole of the 13 years of the dawah in Makkah, a few hundred people, maybe 400 or 500 people max, became Muslim, right? Of those, maybe 100 are in Abyssinia, and they're on their way back now, actually, because the Prophet has already written them a letter asking the Muslims to return from Abyssinia. We'll do that, inshallah, in a couple of sessions' time. Then you've got, the Battle of Badr, where 300 who fought, but obviously you've got a few more 100 than, and then, you've got Uhud. You had how many people in Uhud? There were 1,000, of which, 300 returned because he was the hypocrites. So, and then gradually, year on year, you get slightly more Muslims. Okay, so 5-6 years down the line, here we have the Hudaybiyah. You have 1,400 Muslims, right? But then within a couple of years of that, 10,000 go for Fatih Makkah, right? So you can see the value of peace, right? When there's no threat of war, the Prophet, he then goes overdrive in terms of the da'wah that he does. And when people see Islam as a living example of what it actually is, how they enter into Islam, right, in their droves. But the very first thing he does when he comes back to Makkah after this is he goes and gets rid of Khaybar, the threat from Khaybar, and this was always part of their overall plan. But inshallah, next time we'll talk about the benefits of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. We'll talk about the lessons that we can learn from Hudaybiyah, and we'll see how Hudaybiyah links to how we live our life today, some of the issues around the hypocrisy that we see in and around us. Okay, so inshallah, that might take 1 week, it might take another 2 sessions to do that, inshallah. But until then, do remember us in your du'as. Do remember the ummah in your du'as. Wash your hands with soap and water. Look after your health and well-being. Any questions, queries, comments, do email, WhatsApp, Facebook, or YouTube message. So until next time, inshallah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاك الله خير. السلام عليكم.